Yeah, okay, time to live free. Plenty goals I'm achieving. Some real life topics and talking financial freedom. Mindset, soul and love, everything in between. This is Freedom Podcast. Tune in, live free. Hey, got my mindset right and I got the drive. Planning one day, no more job, no more 9 to 5. Love, money, mind. Love, money, mind. This is freedom. Tune in, cause it's going down. Woo!
Hi, this is Anna and welcome to another episode of Your Freedom Podcast. In this episode, I interview Sophia Barros. Sophia is one half of Eunoia Mindset. So she is a performance and leadership coach with over 20 years of experience in the world of small businesses. She's also got a degree in psychology. She's interested in culture and communications, and she's led businesses and teams from the point of start-up to over 7 figures. Her personal experience of burnout and her journey back to balance inspired her to co-found Eunoia Mindset to help other professionals master their mindset and rekindle their spark. I had an awesome conversation with Sophia. There was lots of synchronicity, lots of synergy. I was nodding all the way through because I think that this concept of having a more holistic approach on business with looking after yourself, not getting burnt out, looking at your mindset and really just valuing your time and your kind of self-care was really synchronized with everything that I'm doing in this podcast. So it's a great connection. Hopefully stay in touch with Sophia and I know you're going to love this episode. Great, Sophia. It's really good to have you on the show. And I know you're, as we said, the other side. You're kind of like, well, not upside down because we're upside down to you, but we're your morning time being in Australia. It is Australia, isn't it, that you're in?
It is. Yeah, I'm based in Sydney. We're on opposite sides of the globe. So we're kind of like yin and yang right now, I think.
Absolutely. So it's great to have you on the show. I know we've been kind of nattering before we click record, and I could tell that if we were on the same side of the globe, we'd get on really well, I think.
I agree.
So it's really good to get you on the show.
Thank you. And it's great to be here. I love the content that you're producing and the raw and open conversations that you're having with people. I think it's such an important thing for people, especially new entrepreneurs or people that are looking to start businesses that often feel like they have to do everything perfectly, and that everyone else has got their stuff figured out. I love that we're, going against the grain.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think that is the thing. People also focus so much on laying everything out so perfectly, don't they, as well? Whereas actually I've learned so much on my journey personally and in my business about just keep moving forward and just taking those steps and taking that action, which we talk a lot about, but it's so true. And I talk a lot about my 3 pillars on this podcast. So because it's a freedom podcast, I talk about freedom in love, which is really around self-love, self-care. But also the love that we have for like connections, like me and you today, just that kind of like love that we put out into the world. And also freedom in money, which is financial freedom. And it's not the, hey, I'm going to be, got 7 figures in 30 days, as we see all over YouTube and online marketing. But it's just the fact that actually being financially free gives you less stress and enables you to be able to choose the time and not have that freedom to be able to do what you want to do. And then freedom in mind as well, which for me encompasses everything else. And mind, or the word mindset, really doesn't do it justice for me. Because for me, it's not about being positive every single day. It's just being able to recognize that if you are having a really shit day, that tomorrow is likely to be different. And that, it's just being able to have like this toolbox of things that you just don't get overwhelmed and absorbed into the things that maybe not have gone right, or if you're feeling stuck, which I know a lot of people that come on this podcast have really related to that kind of. And I know you're going to be really good when we talk about this because I think that is your bag. I can see
that's my favorite topic in the world.
Absolutely.
But I love those 3 pillars, and that's what drew us to actually collaborating into jumping on this podcast, because there's so much value in those 3 pieces. We get so stuck, particularly in relationships, and not being able to connect with others because we're stuck in ourselves. We get so stuck in a sense of joy and in, the way that we want to feel in our lives, often because we let money worries literally dominate our thoughts and our mental track most days. So I love the pillars that you're actually sharing with people, because I think they're fundamental tenets of joy and freedom and happiness long term, you know, so it's so powerful.
So I know I'm going to hopefully get this right. You're a performance and leadership coach. But I want to know, I'm really curious to how you got to this point. Like, how did it all start? Like, let's go back to maybe what you wanted to do when you were a teenager.
Good question. Let's go that far. I love that question. Actually, it's one of the icebreaker questions we ask most people when they join us.
Oh, wow.
Because there's such beauty in these moments when you go back to your origin story of what you wanted to be when you were a kid, right? When you were young, you often find that the core values that you still hold as an adult were there even then. So it's a good question, Anna. For me, at the time when I was in my teenage years, I wanted to be a journalist. So I was a truth seeker and a truth teller. So that was my passion from a very, very young age. I don't know if I knew quite then what journalism was or what the world of journalism today is, but my perception of it was that I would get to tell beautiful stories, and I would get to explore, you know, truths and discover new things. And I think in that way, in a way, I've kind of landed in something that allows me to do that even more than journalism did, because I did go down that pathway for a while. I went down that pathway for a little bit, and it just didn't hold the fulfillment that I had hoped it would hold for me, you know. Long story short, to pay for my tuition and for uni and for all of the stuff that goes with professional degrees, I put myself through a range of different jobs, and they were all business related. So ironically, I fell into my business training. I had two entrepreneurial parents that theoretically, you know, had kids. And if you've ever had entrepreneurs as parents, very often they just grow their kids up and throw them in different positions in the businesses so that they become their support network. So I was learning how to.
My dad was a financial advisor and then ran his own business. So yeah, I remember working in his.
You know this well, yeah. You know this well. So like, I was in a similar position probably to what you were. I was, you know, doing things like tax and bookkeeping at a young age when people were still. I was still in high school, and it's like never officially trained, you know, but I just learned how to do all these things, which was kind of useful because later I got to lean on those skill sets to fund my way through university. And later still, when I finished and I went out into kind of the world of journalism, I had a different mindset, I think, around work than most people did, because I was always looking at it from a business behind the scenes perspective of what does it take for this to operate? You know, what's operationally involved in this running? And in a way, I'm grateful for those foundational years, because I think they gave me a perspective that a lot of people don't, you know, have to pay a lot of money to be able to gain and to learn. So long story short, I remember being in a job at one point when I was working in the media and publication space, and I just felt empty. I will remember for the first time in my life, I had done every job from waitressing to bar work to, you know, working as the second in charge to a financial controller in big, you know, financial firms. I had done a range of things, and I had never, ever felt unfulfilled. Doesn't matter what I was doing. Yeah. And for the first time, I felt completely unfulfilled. And I was like, whoa. So at that point, I realized that I needed to do something more purposeful. So I went back to uni in my late 20s, and I re-skilled as a psychologist. And I went through this training because I wanted to help people. And at that point, that's how I thought I could help people, because I was very fascinated in the mind. And I still am a huge advocate for psychology. But what eventually ended up happening is I found this beautiful sweet spot where between all of this growth and you know, personal development and business development world that I was so passionate about, I could bring that together with the, you know, the psychology training in the background to help people have more of a genuine, you know, well-being when they come into business. Because I don't know if you know this, but up to 72% of entrepreneurs report mental health issues. I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, I can imagine it's high.
It's huge, right? Because it's lonely, especially when you're doing it by yourself, and it's full of stress because no one trains you on how to do this, on how to manage it. It doesn't have to be, but it very often is, especially when we try to do it by ourselves without community support, you know, without having people around us as a tribe. So yeah, there was definitely
a lot of small businesses fail in their first year or so, isn't it? Because I think when you've come from being employed to taking your foot off the edge of the cliff and then running your own business, there has to be that mindset shift there as well. Yes, and you think it's going to happen quicker than it does, and there's all this
You
pressure.
hope. You hope. And if you haven't planned properly, because a lot of people just jump, right? So if you don't have any cushion, then it can be really, really hard financially on you if you haven't got any support for that transition. So you're right. You're absolutely right. I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves. And the other thing is you start, ironically, like I think especially for women, I was reading this statistic the other day. We posted it on International Women's Day. Over 50% of women start their businesses for more freedom and flexibility. Yeah. And ironically, they go backwards in that first period of, the first few years, because we end up not recognizing how to set boundaries and how to set limits to how much time we're giving to our business. We become all encompassing, and things like perfectionism and things like imposter syndrome and things like not wanting to fail start driving the ship of our time and our energy, and which is why so many people burn out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, I think probably women, a lot of women do have children, not all, but if not, they have like maybe a partner or husband that we kind of give to everybody else and neglect ourselves. So if you then give into your children or your partner or both, and then your business, it's like your cup is like then really not just half empty but completely drained.
Absolutely.
Because that's why when I talk about my 3 pillars, the reason I talk about those 3 pillars is that at one point on my journey, there's always been parts where like maybe I was struggling financially, or wasn't looking after myself, or not loving myself, or I was having to work on my mindset. And those have been those 3 things that I've always been focused on, those to give me that equilibrium, really. Because I don't really believe in a perfect balance. Because, like sometimes it might be a launch that I'm doing in my business and I am prepared to put more hours in or do late nights. And then there might be other times where, there might be something happening with my son where I'm like committing to all that time. So there's never like this perfect balance. Yeah. But I'm always aware, it's having that awareness, isn't it, I think? Of thinking I'm doing too much of that, or that habit or behavior is not producing what we're just not, as humans, we're just not perfect. But it's just being aware, I think.
I really love what you're saying, and there's so many things in that I want to dissect. But let's start with the female piece, because you're so right. Like there's this, I forget the author, but there's this concept of a human giver syndrome. And traditionally, women are the human givers, right? In society, we've been conditioned to give, and to take second, right? After our children, after our partners, after society. And so when you come into this space, you often see women carrying a dual load. We're expecting ourselves to be the perfect business owner or the perfect, professional, and also be the perfect mum or the perfect partner at home. And there's a lot more pressure on women generally because of that double load. So you're absolutely right. And I think a big piece sometimes is just negotiating and reconciling what we're choosing to value in this moment. And it doesn't mean we don't have to value our role as mum, but sometimes we have to let go of some of those domestic duties and some of those, some of those expectations, I think, for perfection that we're placing on ourselves at home in order to give ourselves the freedom to be where we need to be right now. And that's a big one. Like that was a big one for me. And I think a lot of women probably can relate to that. You're letting go of that stigma, all these ideas of we should be doing it all, and actually going, hey, I'm human, and it's okay for me to ask for help, and it's okay for me to outsource, and it's okay for me to lean in to different, vehicles. But coming back to balance, because this is like my favorite topic, there is absolutely this myth that balance is something that should always be consistent. And the reality is balance is not like that. So you nailed it when you said sometimes in a cross, section of a week or a month, you might be really unbalanced in terms of how things are looking, but that's a period in time. Yeah. And when you zoom out, I don't know if you've ever looked at those property maps where you're like, oh my God, we're in the middle of a property crisis. But then you zoom out and you're like, oh, the line over the last 100 years is trending this way. Yeah. It's the same for us when we zoom out over a year or over 2 years, or, or over 6 months of our lives, you're able to see that there is a combination of different elements that you're hitting off. And we talk about this in a model we use called the balance bullseye. I don't know if you've ever come across this.
Oh, I don't know.
But it's this idea that as professionals, and especially as professional women, we usually and typically give 100% of our energy to our mission, to our job, to our employment, to our business, especially, if it's in the first few years. And we typically think like there's this unconscious understanding that if we give enough to that, money will come, joy will come, time will come, everything will come. But it's a flawed assumption if you think about it, right? Like we don't just, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't mean that you won't have success, but success will not bring the other pieces that we're talking about. It won't bring joy. It won't bring time and space. Because I'm telling you this, working with 7 and 8 figure business owners that literally come to us because they have no time, no space, no joy. It's money does not bring that outcome. In fact, the more money that they've built, sometimes the more stress and the less amount of joy and gratitude that they have, you know? So it's this idea that if we give it all there, it'll come back. Whereas what we found, just like you're talking about the empty cup, it's the other way around. We expect that our business is going to fill up our relationship bucket, and our relationship bucket is going to fill up our personal bucket. But it actually works the opposite. When our personal bucket, when our me is full, when we make time to give ourselves energy, and this doesn't mean, you know, spending half a day each day in self-care or pamper or morning routine. But it just means meaningful ways that, you know, connect for you, whether that's your value set, whether that's sleeping right, you know, whatever level it's on, right? Replenishing and taking care of your energy is something you do consciously with intention. Then you have capacity to give to your relationships. Right. And your relationships, if, as you know, fill your business bucket. That's where all of your mission success comes from. The more you can connect with your clients, the more you can connect with your staff, the more you can connect with random people on the street that now follow you because they love what your message is. Yeah. The more that your mission survives and succeeds. So it's the irony of the fact that we're doing it backwards. You know, we've got to start central, which will fill up outwardly, you know, whereas we're doing it like, the hard way, in a way, if that makes sense.
I think because when I went through really my difficult time, as I talk about, I wasn't sleeping, and I had a lot of litigation and court hearings, and it was just like this ongoing thing that I felt like was never going to end. And I just wasn't sleeping. And even though I was like, yeah, I'm fine, I was sort of like keeping myself busy with all like the children and business. And I actually consciously thought it was fine, but then I'd wake up with these like hot sweats and like nightmares and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I had to be really proactive to put these things together. I suppose it was more like habits. I wasn't sure that I was doing that at the moment. At that time, I was like, really, I was putting emergency plans to make myself sleep. But what's interesting is I still do these things now. Because I got into this habit, just really little simple, because you know, you're talking about self-care, like taking half a day and things like that. Just things like I always have a bath at the end of the evening, and it's not really to have a wash. I mean, I am having a wash, but it's more of like this routine to just wind down from the day.
Yes.
And if I don't have a bath, I feel like I really missed out. Like if I have a quick shower, or you know what I mean, I just feel like, because normally I'll go in there, I'm like topping the hot water up when it cools down, and just like playing meditation music, just really switching off. But it was I put it in place as a way, because I was just like trying to work out how I can, you know, I got into meditation and stuff like that, to try and switch my brain off to help myself sleep. But these things have stayed because life is busy, isn't it? And I love that though. I just love those moments, and they are like a daily thing.
But I love how simple it was, right? Like what most people do is they don't do this because they think it has to be something complicated. But just even the action of just running a bath for yourself gives you permission to make take 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes just for you, where you don't have to show up as mum, you don't have to show up as businesswoman of the year. You just give yourself permission to just be you and connect with you. And I really love the simplicity of that. So it's like very often these practices aren't big, they're not expensive, they're just the micro moments where you show up and you're like, hey, Anna, how are you feeling today? You actually just check in with yourself in some way, shape, or form. So it's beautiful, and I love the rituals of Stark, because that's what they're there for.
It's like a whole ritual, because sometimes my youngest, who's 12, he'll say, Mum, do you want me to run you a bath, like to try and get in my good book? It's like it's like it's become like my thing.
That's
Even to
great.
the point where they're like have all these different bath salts now, it gets a little bit complicated. Like I'm like picking out all these things to make the bath even better. And my eldest, he does a lot of sports. He's always like stealing my favourite expensive salts. And he's like having these baths now, you know. The other night I ran a bath and I might have it really hot, and then I'll be like doing something else, like, you know, emptying the washing machine or something that's, you know, domestic duty. I'm thinking, oh, the bath's cooling down. I'll get upstairs and he'll be in it. I'll be like, oh my bath, you know. So it's quite funny how that's kind of, I suppose it's a habit that they're catching on to.
You know what? You actually inadvertently, you're teaching them something really powerful.
Yeah.
Because you know how they always say, hey, we think that our kids learn how to love themselves. This is Brené Brown. This is not me. I can't claim this wisdom, but I love it. It's she said, your kids don't learn how to love yourself from how you love them. Your kids learn how to love themselves from how you love you.
Yeah.
So you going, hey, I'm going to give myself permission to run this bath, tells them that they have permission, you know,
it's
technically
really funny when you see habits that they pick up on, you know, because it is proper mini-me stuff, isn't it? When you see or hear that, it's always the things that you've not actually tried to tell them to do. It's just that they're subconsciously copying it. And I know I've done it from my parents. I'm like, oh God, I'm like my mum, you know, because it's just things that we pick up.
Those shock horror moments. You're like, I promised myself I wouldn't do this. Yeah.
But like you say, they are. I think it wasn't me that decided that. It was like because I was in sort of crisis that was like open to get advice on different things that I could do. Because at the time, because my background was working in the pharmaceutical industry, I'd really gone against that industry. Not against as in I just seen behind the curtain. A few people say, "Hey, you could be a whistleblower," but I'd done microbiology at university, so I'd gone into that industry in a way to, like, you know, help people with medicines, you know, but seeing this other side and wanted to get out of it. And so everything that I do now is very like holistic approach. And it's interesting because I still have a lot of friends in that industry and we're really opposite of our views and opinions. It's funny. So I think when I was going through that time, because I was feeling like I was going to be put on this, I was on this spotlight as a mother, like, was I a good mother or was I a bad mother because of the drama that was going on? I was determined that I wasn't going to take medication. That's not to say everybody shouldn't take medication, because I think there is a use for it and some people do have benefit from it. But I was just determined that I was going to do it in a holistic way and also, you know, with mindset and things like that. And so I'm really proud of myself that I never took anything that, you know, not that I should have some trophy for that because of that. I don't want to, you know, people listening to it who maybe have taken antidepressants for a while. That isn't to say, oh my God, you're terrible for doing it. I don't mean it like that. It's just that I just didn't want I didn't want to be on the spotlight and anyone say, oh, well, you're a bad mother because you've got like this depression or anxiety. You know what I mean? So I was just like, and also I just wanted to be able to, I felt like I believed in myself that I could do it holistically.
So firstly, what I'm hearing you say is that you sat with the discomfort, because the reality is doing it the holistic way is the harder way. It's possible. Both serve a function. The reason that so many people go to, you know, antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds is because they're more immediate and they offer an immediate and easier return to a certain level of comfort in our body than doing it the hard way. The problem though, right, and there is a function for them, and I agree with you 100% that sometimes they are necessary, but the problem is that we become complacent with that level of comfort and we stay on them. They don't actually serve the purpose of getting us back to zero so we can start to build from 0 to +1. Very often we just stay at 0 and we just stay on the meds for much longer than we probably need to. So I hear what you're saying, and I think that you should be proud of yourself in a way that you made a conscious choice at that time to work through it in a way that probably wasn't freaking easy, if we're being honest, you know, especially not in the beginning, you know, and yet you stuck with it and you chose discomfort because you wanted to go through the works and to know that you could do that and you could set yourself up to come back to that, because that is freedom in a sense, right? Because we're not dependent on something else to get us to a position. We know how to manage our own bodies in a way that we can get
Exactly. It's that management
out
of
of
like, now that, I mean, we don't know our future life, what's going to happen. I know at some point, because we're not eternal, my parents are getting older, something will happen with one of them, and unfortunately, and there's all sorts of things that could happen, aren't there? We just don't know our future life, and it's not about kind of being, whatever hits me in the future is going to hit me, and you have to give yourself space to go through that, whether it's a grieving thing or whether it's just processing that trauma, or whatever circumstance it is. But I feel that I'm like prepared. Not prepared sounds a weird thing, but I just mean, because I've gone through that experience, I know kind of what processes or how I'd be able to manage it, because it was a really bad time at one point. So yeah, I feel kind of better for going through it. I look at the major positives and being grateful for a lot of it.
And the surprising thing in what you're saying is that, not surprising, but like the key thing is there are emotional anchor points. There, whether they're rituals, whether they're things you learned about yourself, perspective shifts. But there are anchor points that you gained out of that trauma, which in a way have now served you to be able to take on the next level of discomfort. Not the same, different, not as painful in some ways, right? But different levels of discomfort. It's equipped you in a different way. And every time we go through something shit, if we're being honest, there's two ways you can come through it. You can go through it from the fear of, I don't ever want to feel that way again, and we shrink because of it. Or we can go through it and we can expand and we can grow through the experience, which is what they call post-traumatic growth sometimes, if you've ever heard of that. And it's like,
I had a talking therapist who used to talk about that a lot.
Well, it sounds like that's what you did in a way, Anna. That, not to say that there wasn't trauma and there wasn't moments of shrink, but that you've come through it and you've expanded, which is beautiful. And that's the beauty that's available to all of us, but we have to be okay with one thing. And this is the thing that doesn't allow people to do that. And that's, we have to be open to feel what we need to feel to come through.
And
way to go.
I remember I wasn't at one point, and I got help to be able to do that,
It's hard, it's scary.
There was always that thing of like, I didn't want to, I just was like, I'm fine. You know what I mean? And it's like, I realize it's okay to say you're not okay. You know what I mean? Which is really simple. It's a really simple thing. And relating it to business as well. Like, there's been loads of different mistakes that I've made in my business on my journey. And it's about we don't keep making the same mistakes. We want to learn from those mistakes. But you kind of, I remember that, who is it that talks about failing forward? I can't remember who it is, but I quite like
There's
that.
so many people that say that, but I'm trying to think of the original origin point.
But I think sometimes we beat ourselves up when we mess up or something, but it is really analysing and learning from it to then grow from that, isn't it?
It really is. And there's one thing you need to have to be able to do that, and that's self-honesty. That's the truth. You need to, at very least, even if you're not being honest with the rest of the world, which I don't endorse, but let's say you haven't gotten to that level of vulnerability yet, you need to be able to at least be honest with yourself and say, hey, I fucked up here. I didn't do well here. I didn't do what I should have done here. Or, hey, I didn't do great, or I didn't do what I expected, but it's okay. I did these 3 things that were okay. I learned through this experience. It's that honesty with yourself that allows you to view your failures, not with fear and shame, but with openness and curiosity. So I think the common denominator in what you're saying is that you lent into the connection with yourself in all of these different ways. And that's the hardest part for most people, because we've lost that connection with ourselves. We don't have that conversation anymore. It's like we've taken the volume of that inner voice and that truth speaker inside of us, and we've turned it down to mute because we're so scared to hear what it's going to say. A lot of people live in that space for a long time.
I think a lot of that is to do with what people think about you. I remember battling with that, and then we getting to the point where I just didn't care. And I've spoken about this before, and I always say, I do care to an extent, because obviously if someone was sending me some random, weirdo who found me and was sending me all these like death threats, of course I'd be bothered about or someone that had bought one of my coaching programs was like, you're rubbish, and of course I'd be bothered about it. But from a general perspective, what people's thoughts of me, maybe it's online or even just friends, and because I think especially going through a divorce as well, you have to you feel there's a bit of failure attached to that. But so what people's perception, I remember really being bothered about that at one stage, whereas now it's I feel like I'm so enriched on the journey that I went on because I really discovered myself more. It just really doesn't bother me,
I love that.
And for people online as well. And I think when you start a business, that is the pressure, because you're wanting to do everything perfectly. You're worried about what people are going to think of you. Like you say, if you mess up and you mess up badly, you've got to admit to it, because otherwise you're not going to learn from it, and you're gonna that's the biggest thing, isn't it? This isn't working, we've got to draw a line and something's going to change. Or how can you get into that kind of business growth because it's just not working? You've got to be honest with yourself.
You do. And I think you need to have a relationship with yourself before you go into business, because if you don't, it's going to be the hardest way to learn who you are. Every part of you is put on public display. Every part of you is challenged. And as you said, in terms of relationships, every part of you, that people pleaser in you, those boundaries that you don't know how to set yet, all of these elements that, are basically me 101. If I haven't established any baseline for that, business is going to force you to do that very, very quickly. And it's going to be a very, very painful and quick learning journey. But it doesn't mean it won't be successful. It won't be nourishing. Just your growth curve and your discomfort curve will be steep. That's the beast. That's the piece.
I've also learned on my business journey that it's a lot quicker to kind of find people who have already done what I'm wanting to do. So, for instance, even just putting the podcast together, for ages I was procrastinating. I think it took me a year to actually launch it. And there was lots of things I didn't really know properly what to do. So I invested in buying a course and learning, from a coach of how to do it. And, at the beginning of your journey, you don't always have the cash flow to be able to do everything that you want to do. But I think that's where there's been two things in my business: outsourcing tasks, and also investing in, good people that have already done what I want to do.
100%.
So I don't know if you agree with that.
I definitely agree with that. It's you can either invest your time, your energy, or your capital. That's the truth. And the thing that people don't realize is when you invest capital, which is the third piece, you actually save not just time, but you also save energy, because there's mental and cognitive load that you shortcut by learning from other people that can give you things that you don't even know you need to know yet. So there's so much value in what you just said, and I see that all the time. I mean, I can't even tell you how much money we've invested in education between Zoe, my business partner, and myself, in our own education, in our own mentors.
It's scary. You're oh.
It's scary. You could buy property with the amount of amount of money we've invested in education, but it's shortcut our learnings, and it's meant that I don't know if you know this statistic, but in coaching, at least in Australia, it's 94% of coaches or people in the consultancy space won't be profitable, won't ever get their business off the ground. That's 6% of businesses that succeed and 94% that fail. It's a scary statistic, right? But I think the determinant factor for us, at least, to be able to say that we're going into our 4th year this year is, hey, that we've done it because we've invested, and we learned early on that we weren't going to do this on our own. We had to lean on the shoulders of giants. And I think a lot of business owners, and especially startups, go out thinking, I've got to do this on my own. I've got to wear all the hats. I've got to do everything on my own. And that puts this impossible amount of pressure on them to be everything and everyone to everyone. And it doesn't allow them to utilize their strengths. They're actually going against the grain in terms of performance psychology and how we get the most productivity out of ourselves. And that's one of the first things that we actually work with people on, is getting them to change their thinking around this, because deciding that you have to be everything for everyone. And I say this because this was me. This was my journey. I was I'll do it. I'll do it myself.
That's why I'm nodding, because I just even remember in the early days, just trivial things like trying to do all my own accounts and tax and stuff. And I remember I was doing my ex-husband's as well. I think, I can't even believe I was doing all that.
Why?
Why was I doing that? Probably because, like you, as a teenager, I was doing it for my father's business and stuff. It was something I knew how to do. And I convinced myself that I didn't have the cash flow to outsource. It was ridiculous. Of course I did. So I think, it is for it. Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest tips on being able to sort of invest in, like you say, coaches and just being able to outsource tasks and things straight from the start. Because I think I would have saved, like you say, it's time, isn't it? It's time that you save. And
And it's ironic, right?
I'm just interested to hear your point of view, being the position that you do, how you help businesses.
The first thing we work with people, so we have 3 pillars too, and I guess this one actually touches on one of our pillars. The first pillar, we talk about conscious leadership, like to take your business from the point where you're a startup to a sustainable, essentially 7 or 8 figure business. Generally, there's a few things that need to happen. And one is you need to step out of the doer role, stop being the technician that's doing everything in the business, and you need to create space essentially for other people to step in so you can elevate and be the coach. Okay, like in a nutshell, that's one of the core shifts that need to happen for you to grow to that next level. And where people get stuck is they get stuck in the space of capacity. And what I mean by that is they're still running their businesses, even after a few years, with the same strategy of I wear all the hats, I'm the star player, I'm doing all the things, right? And inevitably what that means is they cap out. Their capacity is limited. So the time that they need to grow, to strategize, to innovate, to be creative, the very structures that actually got their business off the ground to start with and saw them have the success are the things that they take away because they get so stuck in the day-to-day weeds of doing, right? So capacity is our first pillar, and it's not just physical. Yes, we're talking about delegation. Yes, we're talking about time and getting, using different structures to make more use of our time, but we're also talking about mental and emotional capacity.
Yeah.
Because a large part of it is freeing up that backpack that you're holding that you don't even realize you're holding, that's actually been layered for years and years and years. And sometimes it's layered from the beginning of your business, and sometimes it goes much earlier than that, where unconsciously you're carrying this load. I don't know if you've ever seen this meme of this woman where she's almost literally hunched down and she's carrying the last 50 years of her life on her back. And in a sense, we do that too. Yeah. And it's like, so we need to empty that load and learn, just like you learn, how to empty it, not just once, because there's a historic emptying, but also the daily practices that we need to empty. And when we make time for that, when we create that capacity, you don't realize, but you actually 10x your performance, your mindset, your creativity, and your solutions because of the fact that you've actually emptied all this weight that you were carrying on a physical, but also a mental and emotional level. So capacity is a huge piece. So I think you're onto something with everything you're saying. It's capacity building techniques like shortcutting, learning from other people, not having to do it.
Would you recommend, because I'm presuming that you work with a lot of maybe medium to big businesses. Do you work with many startups, or do you work with more startups, would you say?
We work generally with startups that are, so they were a startup. They're usually in their like 3rd, 4th year, but we've worked with everybody. Like we've worked with people that are at the beginning and haven't even come up with their business concept yet, all the way through to established businesses that have been around for like 10 years. So there's no kind of, when I say this, I think this advice is relevant for everybody at every level, not just relevant for people at a later time, because you may not know this, but 30% of startups they actually don't succeed past 3 years, not because of product or marketing, all the things that we think in our head is the reason, but actually because of the founder not being able to manage their emotional challenges, not being able to control their focus, not being able to manage their load, right? Feeling too stressed and burning out, not being able to sustain their passion, because that's what happens. We start with a passion and a fire in our belly, but when we overload ourselves and we're pushing ourselves to the brim every single day, day on day, day on day, day on day, and we lose track of the mission and the purpose of why we're doing this, and we lose track of the fun parts and the values that we hold, and we don't get to live that, you're not going to be able to do this for very long, guys. Like this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And you want to have built in some of these checkpoints so that we sustain that passion, sustain that joy, because joy will ultimately, ironically, determine how long you stay in business.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
Funny, isn't it? So counterintuitive.
Yeah. So for people who are listening to this, is there any advice or like explain to us? I know we're going to get to how you can help them, but what would you say, maybe for like a startup then?
Yeah, definitely.
What would you say that they, from your experience? Obviously, we've talked about a lot of tips actually, but if there's anything initially that, is it your 3 pillars or your 3 pillars? I'm curious.
That's a really good question. So our three pillars are, the first is capacity. Always build in space for growth, because you can't grow when you're actually already full up. It's the same concept of you can't give from an empty cup. Yeah. So energetically, when you're absolutely slammed and you're trying to grow and you're already at absolute capacity, you're not, unconsciously, your brain is saying no to growth. Energetically, you're saying no to growth. I remember being in a business that I was a partner in many years ago, and there was a brilliant idea that one of the other partners came up with. It was a great new revenue stream. It was an innovation. And because I was so stressed out, I was like, we can't do this now. We can't do this now, because I couldn't execute it, because I was at my capacity. And ironically, as soon as I got out of the way, because I ended up leaving that business, for my first maternity leave piece, they actually ran that product. And guess what? It's been one of the biggest revenue sources for them ever since. It's like I was the block because of my lack of capacity. And on an unconscious level, we do that in our own lives. So the key thing is, from day one, prioritize leaving, even if it's 20 minutes a week, to work on yourself, to think about your business, or to work on your business. It doesn't have to be hours or days, but you want to build in that space for growth, and you want to constantly be working with a perspective of making sure that you're not overloading yourself for long periods of time. I get that there's going to be survival weeks. I totally understand. Right? But if the goal is to come back to that space, I think that's important. The second pillar we work on is clarity. And this is, I think, a big one. People go into business with a certain vision. That vision evolves, but they never actually spend time reevaluating that vision. So they're kind of in a no man's land where they're between visions and they haven't spent the time to actually reset the GPS. And then we wonder why we get stuck, because we don't have a new direction. Our body is not trained to tell us, hey, this is what we want, which means that from a action perspective, again, on an unconscious level, we're not actually pulling in actions, behaviors, and people that align with that ultimate goal, because we don't know really what that ultimate goal is. Whereas when you spend that time,
you've got like a little friend that's popping up by the side
oh,
of
hello, I just saw him.
I'm like, get out. I just couldn't hold myself back.
You should introduce him. What's his name?
Enzo.
Hello, Enzo. Oh, he's very cute. He's fully engaged now. I love that.
He's like, I want to be part of this discussion too.
Clarity? What clarity? Yeah. So we talk about clarity, right? And it's not just the vision, but it's about breaking down the vision into little milestones, little chunks, and just taking one micro action per week that you can take towards that vision. It's not, sometimes we think, oh, I've got this huge vision, I need to build big strategies. No, guys, just work on a 6-week sprint each time. What are 6 little isolated actions you can take over the next 6 weeks that will bring you closer to one project that's going to connect to that vision? You do that 8 times a year, and you've closed 8 loops in that year that may move you significantly further. But more importantly, they rebuild your passion, they rebuild your focus, and they rebuild your sense of confidence, because you're getting momentum in the right direction. And also you're constantly coming face to face with your why, with what you're doing this for, which is such a motivator, so that would be the second piece.
I think the 6-week thing is really good, because I talk about like making sure that, because I know like a lot of my students, if they're starting an Amazon business or whatever, they've got all these massive long lists of all these things they're going to do. And I just talk about just doing 2 or 3 things a day, just 3 things a day.
That's it.
If they've already got a job or they've got another business, 3 things a week, but being consistent, because you overwhelm yourself, don't you, with this big project? Chunking it down.
Especially if you're working, you're so right. So it's like you really want to block out a minimum commitment to this per week, and maybe that's 2 to 3 hours, and then knowing, okay, what's maximum 3 things that I can do in that time frame, if that's what we're working with, right? So that's really, really important. I think that's huge. And the other thing is just being fair with yourself on your expectations. Like sometimes you can't do 3 things this week. Sometimes your work week this week was so big that you need to be flexible with this week's expectation. Sometimes you've got to, stuff on in your life. So I think with overwhelm, the key thing is, one, being reasonable and always just working on one micro action. That's all. Like not ever trying to look at the entirety of it, because we carry the mental load of all of the stuff. So even though
that's what that overwhelms you, like, oh my God. See, it disables you then moving forward, because you just don't do anything.
That's it. So to-do lists are my enemy. So if you're using a to-do list, get rid of it. And my feedback would be switch to a time blocking system where you pre-allocate at a time when you're calm and not stressed. So typically not at the end of the day, you pre-allocate what the 1 or 2 focuses are for you for this week in that focus block. That can really help a lot from overwhelm. And the other thing is just sitting with the fact that sometimes we feel the overwhelm. We've got to let that emotion pass. So learning how to self-regulate or emotionally regulate, that's the fancy term. The layman's term is learning how to reset your nervous system so you kind of come back from a state of stress. The trick is you can't just tell yourself, I'm not stressed, I'm not stressed. That doesn't work. So as much as I believe in positive thinking, that's bullshit when it comes to emotion. Yeah, we've got to actually spend the time to allow that emotion to reset. And that's where things like the bath, meditation, literally a breathing technique that can take 1 minute can literally move your nervous system back from activation to parasympathetic nervous system. So you want to couple the action with that 1 minute breathing technique for overwhelm.
What do you think about ice cold therapy? You just made me think about that.
Oh, it's definitely, it's hard to do for a lot of people, but it's definitely one of the techniques. There are so many different ways that we can manage our emotion and reset our nervous system. So I think ice therapy and cold baths are amazing. I think a lot of people don't do them because they seem hard. So if you're starting from zero, don't start with an ice bath.
I'm saying it like I do it all the time. I'm like, I've done things like cold showers, but I'm like just a whim, like literally like for a few seconds. But it's something that, it's the craze, isn't it? At the moment, we keep seeing everybody do them. But
they work, and that's why people do them, because they literally work. If you can, it's kind of like, I want you to think about it this way. Like, we're talking about antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds, right? Which really theoretically are meant to reset your nervous system from a state of activation to a state of calm. But what they really do is they suppress your sense of awareness around your feelings. That's why they're not a long-term solution. But things like different parasympathetic nervous system hacks, like cold water immersion, exercise, breath work, meditation,
like movement stuff, isn't it? A retreat that I'm looking at doing, and there's a girl that I know that she does a lot of movement stuff.
Absolutely.
It's really good.
Because what we don't realize is emotion is energy. And I say this because neurologically in quantum physics, emotion is energy. So the energy needs to find some form of expression. It needs to be released. Think about it this way. If you put something in the microwave with the lid on and you close the lid and you turn on the microwave highest function, what happens? Usually explodes or it pops, something goes boom. And it's the same in our body, right? If we're feeling stuff and we're ignoring it, we're not allowing the energy to pass, the emotion to complete itself, internally over time it's going to go boom. And that's where we have major explosions or major down points, or we have chronic illness coming up. So just learning how to manage our day-to-day nervous system stops that chronic boom from happening. That's why it's so powerful. And it also makes you feel better in the day-to-day, right? Because you're changing the way you're doing it into little micro actions. So it sounds, silly because you're like, oh, it's just a cold water bath. But little things like that enough through the day allow you to reset the nervous system and bring it back to a baseline. You're still going to have to do it tomorrow, but just doing that as a practice means that you've got something to manage this energy buildup that's happening in your body throughout the day.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really good. I think it's great. Listen, I could feel like I could listen to you for hours with all of these different, because I'm just like nodding to all of it.
We could talk about so many things. I feel the same way with you.
Because I think what you're doing is incredible, because I think you normally have people that focus on all the emotional stuff or focus on heavily on the business stuff. And what you're doing is like that holistic thing where you're bringing it all together as one. And I think it's really important, because I think some business owners who have had a burnout or a trauma will recognize that they need that. Others won't. So it's just, I really love it. I think it's brilliant what you're doing.
Thank you. And I agree in the sense that a lot of people don't necessarily realize that this is what they need, but they feel it instinctively in their bodies. And the minute that you start to do this stuff, like, oh my God, I feel so different. Oh my God, I slept last night. And oh my God, that pressure I was carrying the other day is gone. And it's like they feel the shift in their bodies. So I think that even when they don't know, the moment that they get exposure to doing work on themselves in this way, at least for me, like I thought I had all my shit figured out. I'll be honest. You know, I was that person. You know, that person that thinks that they have all their stuff figured out.
I'm laughing not at you, just laughing because I'm like, we've all felt like that.
Oh man. And what I didn't realize is that despite the fact that, yeah, I could handle a lot of pressure and yeah, I was, you know, quite effective and quite productive, I was still battling and suppressing a whole bunch of stuff. I still had, you know, what we'd call high functioning anxiety, where, you know, when I'd stop for long enough, I'd struggle to sleep. I'd get those palpitations. I'd feel that pressure on my chest. And I just thought that was a busy day or stress of the day. But I didn't realize that that's actually not the way it has to feel. Stressful businesses don't have to create that internal response. That was my load. That was me.
Yeah.
And when I started to realize that I could let go of that and I could reshape that, everything changed. But I just didn't know because I thought that was just life. I thought that was just
exactly. I think a lot of people do that. Yeah. And
so
I think it's important to be proactive because if I'm sure you will agree with this, that I remember a few people that are into kind of like mindset or psychology have told me this, that, and there's studies to prove it because I've read it as well, that you know, if you don't put in a plan or something in place to do that, then it is going to manifest into physical disease without
absolutely.
And I think then sometimes people don't piece the two together. They're like, oh, I've been diagnosed with this or this has happened. Well, actually, it's probably been building for so long with the pattern and behavior that you've had, all the habits, and like you say, having the palpitations and just thinking, oh, this is stress of the job or stress of the, you know, my business or whatever.
Look, the medical industry itself will endorse this because there's quite a lot of data out there that support that stress increases chronic disease. But then if you go off the grid, then you're reading stuff. Have you ever heard of Dr. Gabor Mate? Have you ever heard of any of his work? If you haven't, that's okay. There's a new book he just published called The Myth of Normal. But there's an old book he published that was one of the first ones that I had read, which was When Your Body Says No, which is all about showing the data and linking the studies that showcase that, hang on, all of these autoimmune flare-ups, yes, there's environmental relationships, you know, we know that we're not eating right and living right, but there's so much more. There's an emotional connection between these pieces. So when we don't give time for these, you know, these pieces that are within us that need our attention, our healing, they will manifest in different forms of chronic disease long term, and they will show up in the body. And it's a really interesting book. So if you're anyone that's experiencing autoimmune conditions, you definitely want to read this book. It's called When the Body Says No. Okay. And it basically backs what you just said, Anna. It's 100% the case. There's so much out there now to showcase that one way or another, you're going to pay the cost and the price of you're going to be forced by your body to make time to heal on an intimate level. Yeah. It's just more costly if you leave it for later.
And you might not have a business, might you? Or God forbid you can't actually do the job, or you have a breakdown or burnout, and you know, your body forces you to actually then take a step away. So I think it's really, really important stuff. For people who are listening to this, how do they, if they're thinking, oh my God, I just love this conversation, I love this Sophia lady, I want to reach out, how do they get in touch with you? And, you know, what is it you do? Is it consultancy, or do you have set programs, or how do you work? Just let us know.
Yeah, great question. So there's a few different ways that we work with people. So we've got some programs that you can take yourself through over like 12 weeks. And we've got masterminds and programs where you connect to other business owners at our level. And what I mean by our level, I mean at the level of people facing the same challenges that you're facing, you know, that are wanting the same kind of outcomes. And we typically help helpers and healers. And what I mean by that is helpers being professionals that are selling their services very often. So people that are in a space where they're actually, you know, they are the product very often. That's a lot of our audience. Yeah. So people like consultants or professionals, financial services, or et cetera, but also healers, people that are actually working in the medical space, practitioners, psychologists, different allied health professionals that essentially are, you know, healing directly the people around them and wanting to improve how they're managing themselves in that process, because it can be very taxing when you're that middle guy, you know, or that middle woman servicing the community around you. Now, that's typically who we serve. So they can reach out to us on, basically they can find us at Eunoia, and I'll spell this because no one knows how to spell this.
Yeah.
It's the number one rule of what not to do when you go in business. Pick a name that no one can spell. Right? It's EUNOIA Mindset. So MIND for mind, set.com.au, AU because we're all the way down under. And you can find us on Instagram at Eunoia Mindset as well. There's a lot of tips and practical tips that we share just, on those public spaces. So definitely check it out. And we talk about, the 3 pillars that we run through quite a lot in conscious leadership, and share what's working and what's not working for people. And the joy of our page is that we also do a lot of work on the unconscious mind space, thanks to my business partner's specialty. Because she's a clinical hypnotherapist. Yeah, so important.
It is so important because, like I say, over the last few years, I've focused a lot on that. And I love all this kind of stuff. I think it's just so important. But I only discovered it all because I was verging on burnout and I had gone through that traumatic thing. So my advice to people is like, do it now. Like, because I think since the pandemic, a lot of people are stressed. Even if you're, you haven't started a business and you're in a job, it's something you need to be proactive on, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you.
Just in this age that we are in, because I was trying to explain to my son about how, I'm this old lady now that didn't have a mobile when I was his age, and that there is this, we're all so reachable and contactable, aren't we? And that even just creates sort of stress, so it's just
100%. Yeah.
Because he was asking me why on like my WhatsApp I have it set so that you can't see the red and seen and all that kind of stuff, because I just don't want that pressure all the time of what time I've been on, just we've got so many different things like that. So I just think the world that we're living in now is a lot more stressful.
The public sphere, right? Like we used to have a private sphere, and we used to be able to switch off and go into our private homes and have that separation. We don't have that anymore. And kids don't even know what that is. And so it's a different world to be living under pressure of public, existence 24/7. Not to mention, I think they said, I can't remember where I got this from, but somebody said that the amount of data that we get in a day in terms of news, exposure, bad news, is more than what our ancestors used to get in an entire year. Really? So it's like your brain is not set up for that. Wow. No wonder we feel overwhelmed and flooded, right? Because it was never set up for that. We've got not millions, but tens of thousands of years of evolution where our brain is operating in this way. And now all of a sudden in 50 years, we've switched this wire and now we're bombarding ourselves. So it's like, it does feel we're up against different pressures to previous generations. It's very true, especially true for the younger ones.
Definitely. And I think also we are trying to be, there is a bit more focus on being a bit more proactive, of being, like, it's like I was doing some research on Etsy for products, and there's a lot of people that are like, trying to create products that are getting away from the digital world. Like fun days out with your family and nature and things like this. There's a lot of stuff around this now, and it's funny how it's like we've dived straight in, and now we're recognizing that actually we need to go back a bit. So yeah, for anyone that's listening to this conversation and is absolutely loving it and wanting to know more about what Sophia and her business partner Zoe do, then do reach out. And I will if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to see in the comment section all of Zoe's links. Sophia's, not Zoe.
Technically, they're co-owned links, so that's fine.
You have to reach out and just see the website that she just mentioned, and also the social channels. And if you are listening to us on iTunes, you'll be able to do the same in the show notes as well. It's been great connecting with you and getting you on the show.
You too, and I love your honesty and your rawness and the conversations that you're opening up for people that I think are so valuable. So thank you so much for having me. I was going to say us, but Zoe's technically not here.
Yeah, Zoe's here in spirit, for definitely.
There she is.
So I always ask everybody this one question because it's the Freedom Podcast. I always ask, and what we've done on the birthday episodes is chopped them up a little bit to the answer to this question and put everybody's answers back to back. Not everybody, but picked out certain ones. So Sophia, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom for me is living a life aligned with my values. So knowing that I can essentially live my values and I have the capacity to do that, that's ultimately freedom, which is a huge piece.
Yeah, I love that.
For mental well-being.
I love the capacity part as well. That's one takeaway from me with that conversation, with this conversation, is the capacity part, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a big one. It's a big one because we don't realize it. So it was definitely the biggest learning curve for me. Like that literal piece is my learning journey plonked into the work that we do. But yeah, thanks, Anna. And it's been great connecting. What's freedom mean for you? Has anyone ever asked you that?
You know what? It's funny because freedom has changed. It keeps changing. I keep adding bits to it. So at one point it was all about time and flexibility, the normal kind of thing that, a lot of entrepreneurs go for, the living without the constraints of, a boss, I suppose, and time, especially because when I came into like running my own business, my children were really, really young. So, but I'd come from this like corporate world where I was really ambitious, and I was also the breadwinner in my marriage, so it was like I always wanted the independence of finance as well. I wanted it all, like a lot of women do, or a lot of mums do. But now within my journey, it is more just not being constrained, as in like just being able to freely, like the freedom in love, money, and mind, just being able to. It's not necessarily do what I want when I want, but it's more that I'm literally just free to do, I think because of my domestic violence journey, there was this constant fear and this fight, that was going on. So it's like, it just feels that I'm like, I really want to jump out of a plane at the moment. Like, that's one of my things that I want to do. I really want to do a tandem drive.
You should.
Because that will it's that feeling that I feel that when I think of the word freedom, that I relate to. Just being,
I get what you mean.
Make those connections with anybody, being able to do whatever I want anytime. So,
Love that.
Freedom.
It's a freedom in you. Isn't that funny? Like initially it was a freedom of stuff outside of you, but now it's a freedom in you that I'm hearing. And that's a transition that I think a lot of people would love to be able to get to, which is amazing. Funnily enough, when I did my tandem skydive, I was petrified. It didn't feel like freedom in the way that you're describing it. But that was me back then. And I know my business partner is a little bit of a skydive junkie, and she would say it's the best thing that you could ever experience in your life. So absolutely go do it.
I really want to do it in Dubai, because I think the UK, just sort of landing in a green field, hasn't got the yeah, I keep called the best 10 places to do a tandem dive.
There you go.
The Palm came up as I think it was like in the top 3.
I can understand that. It's a very different setting, right? Compared to I did mine in Switzerland in the Swiss Alps, and that was amazing. But definitely a green field and some waterfalls and some mountains. It was beautiful. But the Palm's up there. That's a good one. I hadn't even thought about that. Well, enjoy, and please, when you do it, can you please tag me in the video so that I can actually see you living that moment?
I will. I'm going to follow you on the socials. Have you got? I was going to say, have you got a personal one as well? I'll check out anyway.
I don't actually. We when we created the business, we created it as a duo, but I think it's time, and I think I need to. I'm just been a bit lax with that, to be honest. But yeah, just the business one for now.
If I can help you in any way from an Amazon perspective, Etsy, e-commerce, sort of physical and digital products, then do reach out to me, or books and things like that. Do a lot of Amazon KDP books these days as well.
Thank you. That's useful. So, I appreciate that.
So always open to help you if it just give you a few pointers on some things or whatever. So do stay in touch. Sydney,
and you too.
On my bucket list, I keep saying to the problem is when we want to go is in winter time here.
I know.
And we don't get a big holiday. So it's like, I want to go for sort of 3 or 4 weeks if I'm going to do it.
Because it's so big. So if you're making the journey across, you're always going, I need at least a few weeks to sit place, which is true because it's such big distances to travel around. So yeah, try and see how you go. Good luck. You can also come. It's not that cold during our winter compared to a UK winter. So even if you came in another period, like maybe September, you might get some decent weather. especially if you're heading.
I've now got loads of contacts, because I've worked online for a while. I've got loads of contacts over that way.
Oh, good.
Become friends now, and also a really good friend that in the Amazon world, Jay, who lives in, well, he was in, what's hilarious, he was in New Zealand for years. He's actually in Australia at the moment because his parents are in Canberra. But he's coming back to Europe. He, it's like wherever you're from, you want to go somewhere different. He's like been traveling around Europe. He's a bit younger than me and hasn't got children and commitments, but
that's the beauty of the online digital world, is the flexibility and being the digital nomad, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great to connect with you. Really enjoyed this interview, and
please feel free to reach out as well if you ever hit a wall, if you have any questions, or if you kind of want to go deeper with anything. Yeah, we're here because I've really connected. I've really enjoyed your energy, and I've loved having your presence, kind of in this space. It's been really nice. Definitely synergy. I see that.
Definitely. Well, great to connect with you, and I will speak to you again at some point, I'm sure.
Yes. Good night. Good night. Good night. Bye, my dear.
Bye.
Hey, thank you for listening. Hope you had a blast. Here to elevate your life. It's the Freedom Podcast. Love, money, mind. Love, money, mind. Wanna see you all win. Wanna see you all shine. Just make sure that you subscribe. Bringing good vibes. Join the Facebook group. Now it's time to change your life. Hope you come back. Right now is the chance. This is an experience. It's the Freedom Podcast. Hey.